Greetings everyone, Joseph Kursky here with you, and we are on part 3 of Teaching Geography with ArcGIS Online. One of the things that I like about GIS in education is that you can think of this, as my colleague George Daly has informed me and has used several times, and I like to borrow his phrases, is that GIS can be thought of as 3 ships: scholarship, artisanship, and citizenship. Scholarship, communicating, research, writing, thinking, right? So this is the scholarship part. Artisanship. Well, GIS develops key skills. Workforce skills, yes, but also life skills. Organizing, making sense of data, inquiry, thinking critically. And finally, citizenship. GIS allows students to engage in real issues in their community, their region, their country, their world, becoming more effective global citizens. Another way to think about GIS in education are the 3 C's here. Classroom, using it in the classroom to learn about issues. Community, engaging with your community. And also career, developing key workforce skills that are highly in demand and becoming more so with each passing year. Now choose the right approach with GIS. The approach shouldn't be, how can we get geotechnology into the curriculum? Rather, it should be, how can geotechnology help meet our or my educational goals with this lesson, with this unit, with this subject, with this age level each year? That's the approach. Also, geotechnology as a set of tools and methods are not the end-all be-all, right? But they're a means to the end. What I mean by that is that final map that you or the students make is not the end of story, right? It's meant to be a tool to understand a particular issue, whether it's coastal erosion or population migration or natural hazards such as hurricanes or volcanoes or tornadoes, right? It's that kind of thing that you're really seeking. The maps that you make with GIS and the spatial analyses that you do help your students to understand the bigger issue. And also, I would like to say that the role of you as the instructor in GIS is critical, because you're the one framing the inquiry-based questions. The students will use GPS and GIS because they can engage with it. They're fascinated by it. It's a neat and interesting, fascinating technology. But your role is really critical here. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of lines, points, and polygons and images on a map. So, one of the things that I really resonate with me on the use of GIS is this whole being critical of the data. Go beyond the tools and methods. Okay? Think outside the box. Remember that the question is really important here, because what we see depends mainly on what we look for. So if we're not thinking big picture, we're only going to see a little bit of the picture. Okay? Now this being critical of the data, I think, is warranted for a further chat here for a moment. There is so much data available nowadays, right folks? If we thought we had a lot of data in the first decade of the 21st century, you ain't seen nothing yet, right? We have more data now for a variety of reasons, one of which is because ordinary citizens can create geospatial data. In the past, it was mainly government agencies and some universities and some nonprofits and private companies doing this. Now it's really lots of folks, and soon everybody will be able to create geospatial data. Well, how do you know where that data came from? What purpose was it created for? Who created it? Why? What scale was it created at? And that sort of thing. Students need to be critical of data. Geospatial data, yes. Maps are not perfect, right? They all have their inherent errors, right? But they're very useful. Geospatial data is incredibly valuable and useful, but we need to be critical of where that data comes from for effective decision making and effective use of GIS. Now another handy thing to take note of is this Geospatial Technology Competency model. And you can go to the GTCM website and get a bigger picture of this. But basically the idea is that GIS is part of a larger model of educational goals and structure. First of all, these competencies at the bottom, are you ethical? Are you organized? That's really fundamental to your use of GIS. The more you work on these, the better you'll be using GIS. Then these academic competencies. For example, it's not just geography, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago. It has to do with cartography, computer science, biology, and a lot of other academic competencies. Then there's also technical competencies and organizational competencies. Now, I could spend half an hour talking about this. It's really fascinating, though, and you should really take a look at it because it's so much tied into our core tenets of belief, which is GIS is not just this little standalone box thing. It's actually tied to and dependent on skills in other areas, and not just academic skills, technical skills and organizational skills. Now, I also encourage you to incorporate field-based experiences in your use of GIS. We're not advocating to have students just locked up in some computer lab somewhere, right? What we're talking about is actually collecting data out in the field and linking it to maps and looking at it spatially. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into effective implementation of any technology or any method in education, right? What we try to do here on the ESRI education team, in tandem with your efforts, it's our community all working together, is a variety of things. Providing the hardware and software, research into the effectiveness and implementation of GIS in education, networking with your colleagues, support of various kinds, time, money, etc., writing grants, etc., curriculum development. We need some curricular tools, some pieces, some videos, some tutorials, some lessons built, right? And also professional development for educators, online, face-to-face. So all of these things need to be there for effective implementation of any technology, especially geotechnology that has no sort of curricular home. Yes, it's very much fundamental to geography, but let's face it, there's no spatial analysis and education initiative, funding, testing, etc. in countries around the world. It just doesn't exist yet. I'm hoping that someday it will be. There's a continuum of GIS tools. Don't let the phrases get in your way. Basically, ArcGIS Online is a system. It's got an online system. It's got a desktop system component to the system. It's got a mobile component to the system, and there are a variety of different tools. For example, ArcGIS for desktop that you can use standalone software on your computer to really dig deep into how many earthquakes are within 100 kilometers of the plate boundary, or how many businesses of X type, let's say florist, are within X distance of major intersections in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, let's say. Or how many historical hurricanes have happened between the last 10 years versus 100 years ago for that decade, 100 years ago. And are they becoming more frequent? Are they becoming more powerful? It's that sort of thing that you can do with ArcGIS Desktop. What we've been concentrating on in these sessions here, in this part 1, part 2, and now we're on part 3 of teaching geography with ArcGIS Online, is the ArcGIS Online platform. Web browser based, no software required. What kinds of powerful things can you do with that tool? The core elements of GIS, we can debate about this, but here's one way of thinking about it. It's to create geographic data, to analyze data, and to represent data. So these could be considered to be core elements of using GIS. You want to be able to create data, whether it's in the field or just on your computer. You want to be able to analyze it, and you want to be able to represent it. You want to be able to cartographically represent it, and you want to be able to communicate it. I just want to close with a couple of things. One, now more than ever, we need people who can think broadly and understand systems, connections, patterns, root causes, how to think in whole systems, how to find connections, how to ask big questions, and how to separate the trivial from the important. I love this quote from David Orr from his book Earth and Mind on education, environment, and the human prospect. This really resonates with I know many of your core beliefs and with the use of geographic information systems in the classroom. It's all about thinking big picture, but also about real places and real issues. And this thing about separating the trivial from the important, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, we've got a whole boatload of geographic data floating out there. How do we help students to decide what kind of data to use to bear on a certain problem? And then how to make a decision with that information that they have. So think of the consequences. If future societies do not know how to think spatially, that's pretty grim indeed. What I've tried to highlight here in these three sections, these three parts of this Teaching Geography with ArcGIS Online, is making a strong case, I hope, for why and how geographic information systems can be used in education. In the next couple of parts in this series, I'm going to illustrate that with looking at specific problems. Population, we're going to look at some plate tectonics, and a couple of other things. Thanks for joining me here. Once again, though, remember this whole presentation that I've been using is all tied to live web mapping services. I've created, remember this slide about GTCM? I've created push pins on my map for different things that I wanted to highlight. But if I wanted to highlight, for example, coastal erosion, let's say, over here in New Zealand, I could zoom in, I could change the base map, right, to some sort of image-based map, and then I could measure the amount of erosion in different parts of New Zealand. So the point is that you too can use these tools in a powerful way to investigate real-world issues. Now, we've been using the presentation tool here inside ArcGIS Online. At any point, you can dive out, as I've illustrated here, and look at specific places, look at additional issues. So for example, I'm going to add some content. What if I want to add like earthquakes in New Zealand? Okay, I can add earthquake locations, right, to my map. Okay, now I've got earthquake locations here, and as you can see, and as you know, in the news we've had lots of earthquakes in the last couple years over here in Christchurch, New Zealand, on the South Island. Now as you can see, I've pulled up a legend here, and I'm going to click on one of these earthquakes, and I see right now that there was a 4.2, and it's 30 days old from the date, today's date. It happened on April 22, 2012. So I'm pulling in the last 3 months of earthquakes from the USGS Earthquake Service, and I can see the pattern here in New Zealand and of course elsewhere, right? Because I'm tied to live web mapping services. I can see that north of New Zealand, wow, look at that. In Southeast Asia and beyond. Okay, I'm pulling in this live earthquake feed from the last 3 months and pulling that into ArcGIS Online. Now I can really see the ring of fire as it's starting to draw those earthquake epicenters. So I started with a presentation, but then I had a question about what about earthquakes in New Zealand? Do we have any data? Let's pull it in, let's analyze it, let's look at patterns. So that's an example of using the presentation in an inquiry-based mode. Anyway, thanks for being here, and we'll continue now with looking at specific issues, starting with this earthquake one, but specific issues in ArcGIS Online. And it's all in this series, Teaching Geography with ArcGIS Online. Thanks!